Hi guys, Jared Johnson here. Happy Monday. We have an interesting week ahead. This week is Fed week. Here at Union Hedge Funds, we take the Fed very seriously. The market loves it. It seems very counterintuitive, but the market loves to just get overly excited and overly pessimistic about everything that the Fed says, even though I just feel like it's hard for a normal functioning human being on the planet to think that the Fed is, first of all, sticking to what they say, and that the market is so eager to trade it one direction or the other. It's really, really interesting. So we have the Fed interest rates and the press conference and so on this Wednesday, and I think we need to really keep an eye on that. Remember, when it came out that the Fed might be cutting rates more than expected in the dot plots last year, end of last year, we had this big November-December rally. Now, we could say that's just a typical end-of-year rally, but it was definitely the catalyst of that was definitely the Fed meeting. And then it came out that the Fed was probably going to be cutting less. And they kind of poured water on that, and the market reacted in kind. And here we go again. I think it's pretty safe to say that most are assuming, hey, inflation is not really going down much. It has gone down a lot, and we're kind of at this sticking point. The market seems to be okay with where interest rates are. So why is it so anxious to get rates back down? For obvious reasons. But it seems to be functioning. The Fed might be able to stick this soft landing. And so what is their rush to cut rates? And I feel like the market should expect that, but somehow it totally doesn't. And so we've got an interesting week ahead. We'll see what the Fed has in store for us on Wednesday, but it should be interesting. A couple of things to note. I'm always keeping an eye on China. I think China is absolutely worth watching. We've got, really interesting things happening there. If you look around the internet, you see China is a fear factor 99 for some. The property bubble and the debt and the possible unwinding of their financial system is something that you'll probably come across a lot. As well as, is China going to, make advances on Taiwan, and what could that mean, and so on. These are all factors you have to consider, and China is certainly not a play for everybody, but I think it's pretty interesting if we just look technically at the charts. This is one I like a lot. JD is right here. There's going to be a lot of action in this kind of $29, $30 range. We have a 200 period moving average. We have a lot of resistance. That's going to be something that's really big time on my radar. But we'll be keeping an eye on that. We'll see what happens. But I think China is pretty interesting when you look at a couple of stocks. When you look across the setups and the patterns and so on, China looks interesting. There is a lot of news happening there. There's a lot of technical setups. China's on my radar. So take that with a grain of salt. This is not investment advice. This is just something I'm looking at and where I think things are interesting. Remember, a few things to keep on the radar. If China does well, copper tends to do well. And so just keep an eye on copper. Here's copper itself heading back into, highs of all of 2023. It's slowly working its way up there. We've seen some pretty good movement on copper over the last couple of months. This is kind of our February early February low, so last month and a half or so, we've seen copper up almost 15%. If China does well, copper tends to do pretty well. A couple of copper plays that I would just, that are on my radar, that I'm just watching. We have seen FCX, this is Freeport, has had quite the run. Freeport is moving like crazy, and we've seen a nice incline here, or a climb of almost 25% from high to low. It's currently up about 21, 22% off that low. But Freeport's making a pretty nice little run. If you just look at some of the copper plays here, Southern Copper, SCCO, big run there, big run. So we have some pretty big movements to keep an eye on. This one's kind of interesting. This has definitely got some copper love to it, but it's not getting the copper love in the movement. So Rio is something that is interesting. I haven't looked closely enough into Rio. I'm not in Rio. I don't own any Rio. But I am interested why it's going exactly the opposite direction as everything else copper related. So there could be a catch-up trade here. If you're heavy into the research, give it a look. I just think that's interesting. I think that's interesting. Another one that's kind of on people's radar is uranium, and that's kind of making some moves. Here's URA. This is uranium ETF. There's URNM, I think. Is that yeah? That's our Sprott uranium. All these charts look pretty similar. I am pretty interested. I think CCJ kind of has a pretty clean little setup, but honestly, they all look pretty similar. CCJ has, this is more in the uranium production material side of it, and the others are just more related to uranium prices. But regardless, if uranium prices keep going higher and there's shortages and so on, I feel like these have to be interesting. So I'm just watching that. Uranium's on my radar, copper's on my radar, China's on my radar. So I think these are all worth keeping an eye on. I'm just kind of seeing where they go. But remember, as we look at all these, just remember that that the Fed is coming this week, and things get crazy when the Fed goes crazy. So just keep that in mind. Here's a little interesting news item. Did we see? I'm seeing reports that Google and Apple might be in cahoots to do something with Gemini and Apple's products. I was actually weirdly thinking about this over the weekend before this news came out, and I thought Apple was the first to really have something, Siri, to really have something you could talk to your phone and have it do things for you. And then they just never made any progress. And everybody else took off with the AI move, and Apple did nothing. Which is so interesting. These big companies, Google has struggled heavily to get Gemini even remotely functioning. Sure, it's pretty good if you ask it a question. That's great. But even their image production went haywire. Everything's gone nuts. So these big companies really, really struggle to innovate, and I think they really heavily depend on just buying or partnering because they've lost their ability to make something new. It's horrific. So we'll see what happens here. But if we look at Apple stock, Apple's had a little bit of a bump, but it's certainly fading as well. So if you buy the rumor and sell the news, that's probably a better play in all this. But Apple's in an interesting place, though. It's really consolidated. It's certainly diverged from the Magnificent Seven to become more of a outlier here. But Apple tends to do well, and it's always on my radar. So the lower Apple goes, the more interested I certainly am becoming. Just one more for the history books here. We have Tesla. Tesla's getting hammered. It's for all kinds of different reasons. It doesn't really matter what those reasons are, I don't think. Probably one of the big things is that the EV space feels crowded and people are not nearly as excited to stay the EV route as they were last year. In 2023, I mean, everything was going electric in 2023. It seemed like oil refineries were going to be run by electricity, like it's just, they went nuts. And so we've seen that impact here on Tesla. Take Tesla with a grain of salt. Big dips tend to have big comebacks. And so that's something worth keeping an eye on. Tesla has earnings in about 30 days. We'll see, where that goes. That's in another, end of next month. But Tesla's interesting. The lower it goes, the more I'm watching it. So this just a couple of things to keep an eye on this week. This week was more of a kind of a just what is coming, what I'm watching, what I'm just looking at. Again, none of these are recommendations to buy anything. I'm just sharing some ideas of some things that I'm looking at that I think are interesting. Hopefully it's helpful. Questions, comments, leave them below the video. I'm happy to discuss any of this with anybody. So happy trading this week. Good luck. Make sure, keep an eye on the Fed. Once again, if the Fed says something that shocks the market still will move a ton. So just be aware of that. Be careful. Make sure you're protecting yourself and your position to handle any of that may come. Best of luck. Happy trading. See you all very soon.